Walk into any motorcycle dealership in America and watch what happens. Riders walk past the Royal Enfield without stopping. They slow down at the Harley, they touch it, they sit on it, they stand next to it longer than makes any practical sense for someone who came in just to browse. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just brand recognition. Something deeper is happening in that moment. Something that has very little to do with engine specs, price points, or how the two bikes actually perform on a road. It has everything to do with what each bike means to the person standing next to it. And in America, those two things are not even remotely equal. Royal Enfield makes a genuinely capable motorcycle, affordable, mechanically solid, with real heritage stretching back over a century. In India, it's not just popular, it's deeply embedded in the culture in a way that's hard to overstate. Hundreds of thousands on the road, a reputation built over generations, and a rider base that's almost religiously loyal to the brand. So why does it barely register as a serious competitor to Harley in American conversations? Why do American riders walk past it like it isn't even in the same category? Because Royal Enfield sells a motorcycle, Harley-Davidson sells an American. That gap, that specific psychological difference between those two things, is worth billions of dollars and over a century of brand loyalty that no spec sheet on earth can compete with. Here's what Harley actually represents in the American imagination, and it goes deeper than most people stop to think about. It's not transportation. It's not even really a hobby in the traditional sense. It's a statement about who you are and what you believe about yourself. When someone buys a Harley, they're buying into a very specific story. Freedom, rebellion, the open road as some kind of birthright. The idea that there's still space in this country to just go somewhere with no plan, no destination, and no permission required from anyone. That story is so deeply woven into American culture that no foreign brand can replicate it, not because other brands aren't mechanically good enough, but because they simply weren't here for the chapters that built the mythology in the first place. Harley was on American roads when the country was still figuring itself out. It was in both world wars. It was in the post-war freedom explosion of the 1950s. It showed up in the counterculture movements. It appeared in every road film and every image of American independence that got burned into the collective memory over decades. Royal Enfield wasn't part of any of that American story, and you genuinely cannot buy that history after the fact. It either happened or it didn't, and no amount of marketing budget changes that reality. The sound deserves its own conversation because it matters more than people outside the culture ever really understand. The Harley V-twin, that deep, uneven potato-potato idle that you can hear from 2 blocks away, doesn't sound like machinery running. It sounds like attitude, like something that has its own personality and isn't particularly apologetic about it. Harley actually tried to trademark that specific sound back in the 1990s, spending years in legal battles trying to legally own it as intellectual property. They ultimately couldn't make it stick in court, but the fact that they tried at all tells you everything you need to know about how central that sound is to what they're actually selling people. Royal Enfield has a thump to it, and the riders who love that sound genuinely love it with real passion. But it doesn't carry the same cultural freight. It doesn't make strangers on a sidewalk stop mid-conversation and turn around, and it doesn't announce itself with the same kind of authority. In America, the Harley sound isn't really mechanical at all. It's emotional. It bypasses rational thinking completely and hits something older and more instinctive in people who grew up around that culture. Community is one of Harley's most powerful competitive advantages, and the interesting thing is it has almost nothing to do with the motorcycle itself. HOG, the Harley Owners Group, has over 1 million members with chapters in almost every American city, organized rides happening constantly, and major annual events like Sturgis and Daytona that pull hundreds of thousands of riders together around a shared identity every single year. When you buy a Harley in America, you don't just get a bike. You get handed membership into one of the largest, most established rider communities in the world, complete with people who nod at you on the road, a reason to show up somewhere on Saturday morning, and a genuine sense of belonging to something bigger than just yourself. Royal Enfield has been actively building community in America, and they're genuinely trying to close that gap. But the infrastructure isn't there yet. Not at that scale, not with that depth of history behind it, and not with the kind of emotional weight that decades of shared culture creates. For a lot of buyers, especially men in their 40s and 50s who are quietly looking for somewhere real to belong, that community is honestly worth as much as the motorcycle itself, maybe more. There's a status layer to all of this that's worth being straight about because it drives a lot of purchasing decisions that people won't always admit to. Harley is aspirational in a specifically American way that has nothing to do with wealth or exclusivity, the way a luxury brand is aspirational. It's aspirational in the direction of freedom, toughness, and authenticity. The idea that you're someone who doesn't play it safe, doesn't follow the script, and genuinely doesn't care what the people around you think about your choices. That's a very specific kind of status signal, and it's deeply appealing to a very specific kind of American buyer who has spent a significant portion of their life inside systems and routines that feel like they belong to someone else. Royal Enfield carries its own aspirational weight in different markets for different reasons. In India, it signals rugged adventurousness. In Europe, it signals vintage taste and understated cool. But in America, it reads as interesting at best and not nearly as loaded with personal meaning as Harley is. In a purchase, this emotional meaning matters more than almost any other variable. Price is worth addressing because the dynamic here is genuinely counterintuitive, and most people get it backwards. Royal Enfield comes in significantly cheaper than most Harleys, and on paper, that should be a clear competitive advantage in any rational market. In the American motorcycle market, though, it sometimes works against them in ways that feel almost unfair, because price signals something psychologically to buyers. A lower price point on a motorcycle can quietly read as entry-level, as a starter bike, as something you ride before you can finally afford the real thing you actually wanted. Harley's higher price becomes part of the identity itself, signaling commitment and seriousness, and the fact that the person riding it didn't compromise or settle. They waited until they could get exactly what they wanted. That psychological dynamic affects purchasing decisions in ways that have nothing to do with rational value comparison, and it's one of the reasons premium pricing in emotionally driven markets often strengthens a brand rather than weakening it. The honest reality, though, is that if you stripped both bikes of their branding entirely, no logos, no history, no cultural associations attached, Royal Enfield would hold up remarkably well in a straight comparison. It's a capable, characterful motorcycle that handles certain things genuinely better than a Harley does, and younger American riders are starting to notice. The Interceptor 650 and the Meteor are getting real attention from riders who care more about the actual riding experience than the badge on the tank. And that conversation is growing, but that's happening at the edges of the market right now, not the center. The center of the American motorcycle market still runs on exactly what it's always run on. Not specs, not price, not even raw performance. It runs on story, on identity, on what the machine says about the person throwing a leg over it. And in America, nobody has built that story longer, deeper, or more effectively than Harley-Davidson. That's not a gap Royal Enfield closes with a better carburetor or a lower sticker price. That's a gap that takes generations to close, if it ever closes at all.